and welcome to my channel. It's me, Lauren, filmmaker extraordinaire, and today I have a really special little surprise for you. I actually went on my sister's podcast, The Menuscript, to talk about adapting the book The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. So I'm basically just gonna play a little intro from her and then play the episode, maybe a little cuts, add some visuals, and yeah, I do recommend though that you go check out her podcast. I think it's on like every single podcast app. I know it's definitely on Spotify, and give it a listen and see what you think. Hi, I'm Rachel, the hostess of The Menuscript, a podcast all about excellent books, super authors, and what's cooking. So what we do in the show is we take either one specific book, or we look at an author and all the books that they have written and talk about it. Do a summary, key things that stood out, major takeaways, lines that really resonated. I call them chef's kiss lines. And then we share a meal that was either inspired by the book or have something related to it. I also like to include a few books that are similar if you're looking for something that has a similar taste to the book that you just read. And yeah, that is about it. Check it out. So instead of staying in the kitchen, Lauren and I are off to the movie theater. Maybe one of those fancy ones where they serve your food. Any book lover's dream is to see a beloved book turned into a great movie or show. But on the flip side, any book lover's worst nightmare is seeing a book that they love get turned into a movie or show and then having that adaptation be terrible. We can probably all think of at least one example, Aragon, that fits that bill. Lauren, as both a book lover and a filmmaker, gets the unique dream of envisioning being the one to adapt a book for the screen. So grab some popcorn, sit back, relax, and join Lauren and me as we talk about the book The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson, and what Lauren might like to do as the director. Before we start talking about an adaptation, let's just start with a short summary. The full title of the book is The Devil in the White City: Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. Sounds a bit magical, right? Maybe gives some night circus vibes. Wrong. True crime fans, this one is for you. This book tells the story of Daniel H. Burnham, the architect who led the team of engineers, designers, and other architects charged with creating the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. And this book also tells the story of H.H. Holmes, a doctor who built a hotel in Chicago, a mere train ride away from where the fair was going to be held. And that hotel is the last known location of many young women who either were involved with H.H. Holmes or came to Chicago for the fair and mysteriously disappeared. So this hotel is not your typical 5-star all-inclusive resort. No, sir. Instead of a spa, it's got an acid vat, dissection table, and crematorium. Excellent. So the book opens in 1890, so that we can see how both Burnham and Holmes arrive in Chicago as architect and doctor/killer, respectively. And throughout the book, we see the trials and tribulations Burnham had to contend with in preparing the city. And we see Holmes's life unfold as he becomes what many consider to be America's first serial killer. So now we've given a very, very broad summary of a fascinating and complex book. Let's take it to the screen. And action. Lauren, what about this story is enticing to adapt?
Honestly, this is just one of my favorite books. So when you came to me with this idea and what might be interesting to adapt, I thought about the books that I've read multiple times and are stunningly visual in their writing that I think is just like very easy for me to see in my mind's eye, which I think is the easiest to adapt. When I've read it, automatically see a vision. I also think that although the whole true crime documentary, TV shows, books can be a bit controversial of a topic, I do enjoy a bit of true crime. I think it's very interesting. The mix of history, psychology, I find fascinating. And I think it would be cool to depict a story that's, I think, not really that well known because at least I don't really know that many people who know about H.H. Holmes. I know a lot of people know about like Ted Bundy, for example. But when you think about pre 1900, I feel like, well, I can think of like Jack the Ripper, and he's in England. So, like,
So
what
true.
about like what about early America? And Chicago is one of America's biggest cities. And again, people like I feel like forget about Chicago. It's New York or LA. I mean, to be fair, I'm in LA and I want to go back to New York. I don't want to go to Chicago. But besides, it takes place on an interesting spot. It's the Midwest and it's pre 1900.
And yeah, similar to what you're saying about how it's a story not a lot of people know. People may know the World's Fair was in Chicago, but they may not know everything else that like led to putting that type of event together. And right, like I certainly didn't know anything about Holmes prior to reading it. And to what you said about being maybe kind of controversial, I know you and I have both talked before about things like art and film and books creating a great space to be controversial and to, to not always have the happy, skippy, go lucky things. Like these things should make you think and explore multiple sides of humanity and history. And it's a fascinating book. So I was really happy when you picked it because I was like, oh yeah, this is great.
I also think it's super important, like in this story, although obviously there's also the architecture component, which I find very interesting as someone who does not understand architecture but likes to build Legos. I also think this kind of story, when especially if it's a true story, can really highlight like the victims and their stories and not necessarily just be a romanticization of the serial killer, which I think is the bigger problem that we as a society face when it comes to true crime a lot.
Nope, that is an excellent point. And I love that you've got that mindset. And I think, right, like you wouldn't just romanticize Holmes, you would take into account all of the women as well and really show their stories and who they are aside from being his victims. Keeping kind of all that in mind, because you had so many things that excite you about potentially adapting this book. Would you be thinking a feature film or a mini series, maybe even a show with multiple seasons? I don't know how well that one would play out.
I think it sort of depends how the project would be approached. If it was to be a project that's very specifically about Holmes and the hotel and the women, I would say then a feature could probably suffice. However, one of the things that I think is so important about the book is the architectural component and the overall like desperation and push to make this work in Chicago, which explains why so many people are willing to come to Chicago and give this city a chance. And I think that if you left that aspect out, it would be harder to understand the motives, especially for some of the women to leave everything they know and go to Chicago. So I think in that sense, presents a limited series would be a really good option. So potentially have like the first episode be the introduction to the characters. And then off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how many victims he has, but potentially do kind of like one victim episode kind of after that.
And then work the architecture in.
Exactly. And have the architecture be an element in each episode as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I really do love like limited series. I'm happy to see more of them. I mean, maybe they've always kind of been a thing, but I'm thinking about like All the Light We Cannot See and some other books that were turned into like 6 to 8 episode series. It's so well done, right? They do get to go deeper than just one feature length film, but not have to stretch it out over multiple seasons and then try to fabricate extra plot points that just sort of ruin it.
Yeah, I think slightly tangential. I think sometimes there's too many limited series because I think something that we learn in film school when you're writing a screenplay, and maybe this is also similar for authors, is you have to kill your darlings. Like that's kind of a saying. And basically it's like, is this necessary to story in a visual medium?
Hmm.
And sometimes I think the answer is no. For instance, this is a movie about Lord of the Rings. Yes, there are 3 movies from 3 books, but there's a ton of things that are left out. And I think it still works for with Harry Potter. There's a lot of subplots that are left out in the movies, but the movies
Mhm.
still. So I think it does depend. That being said, I do think this one would be a good limited series for the aforementioned reasons.
You for saying all that. Everything you said makes complete sense. I hadn't really thought about it that way before. And this proves why I should stay in the kitchen and not the film studio. You have to assume, that not all your viewers are going to have read the book, right? Even the movies you just mentioned, like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, plenty of people have seen those movies and then have not ever read the books, or they read the books later because they liked the movie. So, how would you approach that when thinking about maybe elements to keep, how much time to spend on certain characters and events? Um, Also, of course, like you're going to have the diehard fans of the book who want everything. And I mean, going in, you're never going to please everybody. But, just what are some things that would be running through your head?
I think it's very tricky in the sense that I think a lot of the book, from my memory, some of it's sort of they show like letters or articles that kind of came from time in their excerpts. And it's like, how much of that, if we try to include, would that be exposition? And
Hmm.
it's hard. Like I think about the books, movie, TV show adaptations that I've seen, and sometimes it's like they did not give enough info to understand the lore. However, that's
Hmm.
usually fantasy. I think it depends, again, unfortunately, on how much are we leaning architecturally and how much are we leaning serial killer. Because if we want to do more of the architecture, there's a lot of exposition about how Burnham was chosen. And when his like partner passed away, like if he was going to stay doing the planning. Um, I don't know. How would you go about that kind of backstory for the position? Or do you think you would rather just have him start? This is his job. Like he's the architect, he's been chosen, and just kind of avoid the backstory initially that way? Or I don't know. What do you think?
That's so tough because, like, right, the backstory was so fascinating and so important. Like, he didn't just magically, walk in and say, I've got a plan to be the lead architect. So I think I would have to work it in. But when you mentioned kind of using the media with different photos or letters, I almost started picturing, and again, this is thinking we're going more the mini series route. Um, how like in Game of Thrones, in the intro music each time, they kind of show the locations that are going to be,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there could be a way there to maybe work in some of the designs or, um, maybe a picture of a telegram or
And with some info.
letter, just or some background info,
Yeah.
and then hope no one clicks skip intro on the series, but that's their loss.
Oh, that's a great idea. And like then you
So,
could visually actually show the actual piece of media.
right, like you could incorporate that right in. So that's probably how I would do it, unless my only other thing would be to have, again, most of the episodes dedicated to kind of one episode per victim, as you had said, but maybe one episode, maybe even like the bulk of the intro being about how Burnham got appointed.
Yeah, yeah. They'll set
Um,
the appointing of Burnham his coming to Chicago, and then maybe introduce Holmes halfway through the episode or later as kind of the mysterious
yeah. Yeah, so
character.
probably something along those lines. But I also think like I do like the overall idea of the one episode per victim. Again, thinking of like a lot of the audience as true crime fans who might, be more interested in that storyline. And if the architecture really does grab them, they can then go read the book or
Yeah.
find other things to supplement that.
Yeah. And I think maybe this is me just being more like woman focused, but I definitely also care. Like, obviously, I think Holmes as a character is intriguing, but I kind of feel like his backstory can be explored in each episode a bit later on, like because he's not
Mhm.
architect. And then the main bulk of the next is like why the women are coming. But that can align with like why he's there in the first place. I think
Yeah.
the main thing is to I would want to steer clear of being too technical about the architecture. Obviously, explain like, okay, they're building this, etc. But I feel like maybe even in my brain, like even with Holmes, there was a part where they were talking about like not cubits, that's like biblical, but like very specific measurements about the buildings, the layout. And quite
Mhm.
frankly, I don't think that's essential information to
Kind of a
show.
Les Miserables French sewer situation
Yeah,
there.
exactly. Exactly. I don't think for the book, I think it can be helpful, but I think you could visually maybe show it without being so explicit about this is 42 feet and 1 inch, just I think it's, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't think we necessarily need to go that in depth again, unless you worked that picture blueprint into your intro. A key part of my shows here, as regular listeners know, are those chef's kiss lines that really stand out with us. While these may not be this quite the same vein of the chef's kiss lines, are there any direct lines from the book you would want to keep in a film? I know for me, the line that really jumped out, or what I was thinking, maybe I want to make it into the show,
Oh,
but I
it's
can
making it for
absolutely
sure. I already know how it's making the
in
show.
a trailer is like Holmes's line, "I was born with the devil in me."
I would actually say that could be a great line to like end the first episode with, to be honest.
Oh, I love that.
Like you sort of have been introduced to him, and like I don't know, maybe it ends. He like opens a window and he's like looking out at the sad city of like the back ends of Chicago, and he's very much dramatically like, "I was born with the devil in me." Boom.
Yes. Okay. Yep. That has to happen.
When I saw that like in the prep, I was like, "That's exactly like one of the lines I would have picked." I also think for a line that is a bit more from maybe like the architecture standpoint, I really liked the line, Chicago has disappointed her enemies and astonished the world.
Mhm.
That's more from like the architecture standpoint, obviously, but I think it really goes to show, especially kind of like the Midwest, maybe vision, people thought how they thought about that part of the country. And they're like, oh, it can't work. And like, what can they do? Everything's been real struggle. And I think to kind of be at the toward the end for them to be like we accomplished this great victory. And I think also in kind of contrast, you're seeing this architectural victory and what Chicago has accomplished for the World's Fair. But we as the audience would also know that Chicago has also disappointed its citizens. It disappointed its residents in the safety and lack of regulation and how people were able to go missing and killed. So we can see like maybe Chicago did astonish the world with its kind of grandeur, but maybe it missed the smaller things and like did it really succeed in a profound way? That's
Yeah. No, I think that quote definitely resonates as well, and it's something so important to think about, especially as we look now at like cities that host the Olympics and other big world events where they know all eyes are going to be on them.
yeah.
Uh, they want to astonish the world, but how much also disappointment and failure to maybe respect citizens or make good choices is going into that as well.
For evidence for that, like LA is hosting the Olympics in 2028, and they've started talking about some of these plans. And I've only been in LA for a little over 2 years, but there are people who are like, "What are you talking about? We're putting all this money, but what about to the homeless population?" And they're planning on building these bullet trains to get to LA, like from Vegas, and there's one from like I think to the north. I'm not sure if it's San Francisco or Seattle, and it's like, but like where's the transit money going in for the residents, the people who live here? all the
Right. Like I
time.
feel like LA is kind of known for having bad public transportation.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy, and I know that's not relevant, but just as an example of like where like the cities and like the governments are maybe putting the emphasis on the wrong thing. To go back to the question, I'm not sure how this would go into the show as well. Like this would sound very expositional, but I really like the line, "There's no more melancholy spectacle than a festival hall the morning after the banquet when the guests have departed and the lights are extinguished." And like potentially that would be like the end, like in like text. There's no way to put it in verbally where it won't sound insane to put in. Because I think it's to go back to the astonishment, it's like a whole big spectacle, the glamour that you could show really well, providing on the budget of the episode or the shows overall. But then what? Like then it's just like empty and you see like all this time and money has been spent and what are you left with? And I think that can happen in real life. And then you're like, well, I'm left with the memories, I'm left with this great experience. That's the guests, right? The guests made the budget.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of up to us as people or the situation to be like, well, what are we left with after the result? And that can be, I mean, in this case, maybe loss of life, unfortunately. I don't know. I just think it's very interesting. But again, I don't know, like if someone were to say that out loud.
Yeah, I'm trying to think too, like how you could work that in, like unless it was like just shown on a scrap of paper, like during, like as someone is planning out something. Yeah, it'd be a weird spoken line, but it is such a beautiful line.
And then another one that I think would be adaptable, and maybe you can help with how we could rephrase this because you've read a billion books. I really like the line how easy it was to disappear. 1,000 trains a day entered or left Chicago. And that, of course, shows example maybe for the women, but also just like more people in general. Like so many people were coming in mass. But I'm not sure, like, who do you think would say that?
Hmm. I almost think you could split it. Like maybe you give the 1,000 trains a day entered or left Chicago to Barnum.
Mhm.
Um, as he's making his plans for the fair and coordinating things, or just some other city official thinking about like how many people are going to be coming in and out of the city.
Oh, yeah, true.
Um,
There's like commissioners and other
right, like there's
officials.
going to be other people around. And then give the how easy it was to disappear to maybe to a different, maybe to one of the women who's coming into the city looking to start over for um a new chance or something.
I like that idea of giving it to one of the women. I had been thinking maybe Holmes, but it didn't feel, I don't know, it didn't feel right to like give it to Holmes. It felt like a little too like on the nose. And for how he could like get away with it, which he did get away with it for a while. But I just feel like, yeah, if you give it to one of the women, like she sees it as an opportunity, as a positive, like for her, versus
Mm-hmm.
sexuality, then became a negative thing. So it could be something
Yeah.
like, kind of when she arrived, like maybe like Emmeline or one of the other women like arrives, like this is my chance. And then it was actually Holmes' chance.
Right. Like
So
she thinks she's disappearing maybe from her old life and has this new chance in a new city, and then ends up disappearing in a very different way.
I'm not sure if this is one of your questions, but I think it's worth talking about the depictions of the murders. And I'm just curious because I have an idea. What do you think about that? Like, do you think, or when you're reading a book and then you think about an adaptation and it's a little more graphic, do you
Mm-hmm.
wish like things to be more implied, or do you like prefer to see more like this is what happened to be like this was brutal?
Um, it kind of depends on the overall, I think, vibe of the book. But this book is dark. And I think to really convey that, you need at least two of the murders, I would say, to be very graphic and true to the book. I think some of the other ones you can have implied, especially if there's some that might be similar, not to like diminish those women
Of
by
course, of
any
course.
means, but just thinking about,
The
how
audience
they're
doesn't
gonna
need to
flow
be
and play. Like you don't want to have the same thing happen every episode, or you don't want every episode to have this graphic, brutal murder.
right, because we don't want to glorify, romanticize the murder. But we do want to depict that it was real and painful. I think the one that maybe we don't see her death, but I believe one of the women has like her footprint on the wall that's like stuck because of the
Yeah.
gas. And like that is an image visually that I could see as closing out an episode as well, maybe of her.
Yeah.
And like again, maybe we hear like maybe some screams. We don't have to see her actual death, but we can see that like that moment from it. Because I
Yeah.
think it's very delicate. Me personally, like I'm not great with gore on the screen. I'm not great with gore in real life. Like I don't really like blood or whatever
Yeah.
in real life. But I do think there is like a good time and a place where this is what happened. And to kind of gloss over that takes away from like what they went through. And so yeah, I agree. There has to be a balance of being like, this is what happened, this is reality, but also we don't want to like, what's it called? Like, I feel like the word I'm thinking was like trauma porn, but I feel like that's not the right phrase. But it's like we're not trying
No,
to
but
like,
I know what you're saying.
I don't want someone to watch this and feel like we're exploiting the victims more, I guess.
Oh no, definitely not. Yeah, that's why I think I'm leaning a little bit more to more of the implications, or right, like the footprint that you mentioned. I think that would be very visually not appealing, but it would make an impression and show the brutality without actually showing her um her dying.
Yeah. I think what this combo has given to me is like more implicit in the moment and then showing the impressions of them being gone directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's I agree. I'm liking this. Right now, if you could have your pick of actors or actresses, is there anyone that you would absolutely have to have in your movie?
So this is interesting because I'm thinking H.H. Holmes, he's supposed to be a handsome, charismatic guy, but I almost feel like he can't be like too handsome because he somehow
Mm.
has to sort of blend in a little bit. And Leonardo DiCaprio had actually optioned this, I believe with Martin Scorsese, but it
Yes.
hasn't happened. And then there has been other people trying to option it. It's never come to light. And although Leonardo DiCaprio, I think, is definitely a handsome actor, I feel like he's like too handsome. And he's too like stereotypically like charming. I feel like he needs to
Yes,
be
I was thinking the
a
same
little more
thing.
like slightly subtle. And it's been very hard for me because I'm also trying to think like after this, we could do something with them, right? Like you could change their hair, give them some prosthetics. And I think maybe this is also just like my preference maybe for hair color, but I think Sebastian Stan would be really good at
Mm.
films. I feel like he's like obviously kind of attractive, but he gives a little bit more of like a rugged vibe, at least to me. Maybe I'm biased here, but I feel like he could do a good job in the role. And then like Burnham needs to be like someone who gives like official stoic. And I feel as though he's too old for the role now. But I kind of feel like Colin Firth would do a good job. Not like Colin Firth from
Oh,
Bridget Jones, but like Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy.
Mr. Darcy, The King's Speech.
At the King's Speech. So even though like he's too old for the role now, that's who like if I could envision, that's like who I would immediately kind of pick. The women is a little harder because some of them I feel like die pretty quick.
It's true.
Unfortunately. And I feel like they would kind of need to be, I would almost want to do like open casting and pick like some real women from the Midwest
Mm.
because so that like these were not like these are women who kind of came and went in a sense. So we don't need someone who's like super famous to play them because they're supposed to represent like the average woman who could have been
Yeah.
tricked and passed away. And then if you're thinking like as a director, showrunner, if you can help someone get like their breakout role, like that's also very validating. And that's like a bit more selfish from like the showrunner's point of view. But like if you can find an actress, like you help find an actress who's trying to come out, like get into the acting world and you help her get out there, that's like a victory for you as well. So it feels like a win-win.
Absolutely. No, I was gonna say it doesn't sound selfish at all. Like you're instead of going from a list of known people, you're taking your known actors as Barnum and Holmes and then giving all these other people a chance. I think that's great. When you were saying though, that Leonardo DiCaprio is maybe like too handsome, for whatever reason, the person whose name like popped right into my head for Holmes is Ray Fiennes.
Oh,
And
I sort of see it. I feel like he's too old now, but
he
similar to
might be too old as well.
he is sort of eerily charming. Like in the movie The Duchess, I think.
Mm.
Like he's like obviously a terrible guy, but he's definitely somehow still gets the ladies, and I could see it. I could see it. I think something that is just so interesting is like both the visual story that you want to tell, but also there's like not even the politics of the story, but the politics of getting the film or TV show to be produced, and that balance of known actors, unknown actors, how much money are these actors going to cost? And it all like comes into play, and you have to balance out, are we willing to spend more money maybe on this really well-known actor, and then we have less money in the budget for other things, but like at the same time, sometimes you need a known actor to get people to get eyes on the screen. And you can spend as little money as you want maybe, but if no eyes are on the screen, it like almost doesn't even matter.
Right.
So,
And I feel like especially if you're trying to entice people who haven't read the book, you
right.
do need at least one for that name recognition. But no, that's a really good point. One more question before we wrap this up. Instead of sharing a meal with our audience, as I often do, what is your favorite movie snack?
I've got to say, I'm a pretty classic popcorn girly. Like when I go to the movies, 9 times out of 10, I am an AMC A-list member, not sponsored. And I will usually get the large popcorn and a large drink because it's the same price as the regular popcorn if you're an A-list member. And I don't see any reason why not to size up.
Might as well.
Always finish the drink or finish the popcorn later. I know some people think that's gross. They're like, why would you have your overly buttered popcorn the next day? And it's like, it didn't turn poisonous overnight. I promise.
Yeah.
But then the 10th time out of 10, if I'm at the movies, I will actually get the pretzel bites, which is
Bites. Okay.
because sometimes I'm feeling more like soft bite, not crunch.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm at home, I will make some microwave popcorn and I will put it in my Taylor Swift Eras Tour popcorn bucket. Also not sponsored. And that's about it. What's your favorite movie?
I feel like a lot of times, like when we would go to the movies as a family or with our uncle, I would lean very heavily to the Junior Mints.
I'm like, I totally forgot about Junior Mints.
Those are so good. And like movie theaters are probably the only time I ever would eat them. Of course, if someone near me has popcorn and they offer me the bucket, I might take a few. If I'm at home, it kind of depends. I might grab a scoop of ice cream or, just have like some yogurt and granola if I'm don't have any ice cream on hand. So nothing too exciting, but still tasty. But yes, definitely if I'm at a movie theater, going with the Junior Mints.
Oh my God. You like literally flashed me back to the past. Only forgot about Junior Mints. Wow.
I mean, for all I know, they don't even sell them anymore. Maybe they went out of business, but you can let me know next time you go to a movie. Do they have Junior Mints? Roll credits. That brings our discussion on a book. Cut. Okay, cut. No roll credits. No credits. That brings our discussion on a book to screen adaptation of Devil in the White City to a close. Please follow the show in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also follow me at the Menuscript on Instagram to see more mouth-watering meals I'm making and the amazing books that I'm reading.
If you liked this special little podcast episode, again, please go listen to my sister's podcast and also like this video and comment down below your thoughts so I know that you liked it and maybe I can bring her on to my channel. All right, thanks so much for listening/watching, and I will see you next time.